Welcome to the Biblical Leadership at Work podcast. I am your host, Jason Woodard. This month, we will meet a man that God is using in a big way to impact the Faith at Work movement. CEO of Workmatters, David Roth. David has been leading this organization for 19 years, and he sums up what Work Matters is all about. But just the idea of helping people discover a purpose and a meaning in the work that they're doing is so missing and lacking. People just don't think in those terms. But that's certainly what we're all about. While Work Matters is focused on equipping workplace believers to close the gap between their work and their faith, David understands that many people are either disengaged in their work or are at the other extreme like he was early in his career. My identity was my business card. It was my title. I was a senior VP of marketing at this high-flying software company. God used an unexpected job loss to shake up David's world and eventually led he and his wife towards being a part of the Work Matters organization and becoming its first CEO. When David first heard about this concept of integrating your faith and work, he knew that's what God wanted for him. And I was blown away. I was sitting in the audience, and it was as if my whole career and my faith journey had kind of come together in that moment. And so I literally volunteered that day. So join me now as we meet David and see how God has worked through him and his team to help thousands of other believers integrate their faith and work. David Roth, thank you for joining the podcast today. I really appreciate the time here, and I look forward to getting to know you.
Yeah, me too, Jason. Thank you for having me. I've been looking forward to it.
Good. So, David, why don't you go ahead and tell the audience about yourself, your career background, what you're doing now, and we'll talk a little bit about family in that context, and then we'll go into your faith in the Lord and how you came to know him.
Yeah, absolutely. I think my work story is really best shared in kind of two halves. And I call the first half a Sunday Christian half, where I was just really focused on my career and growing my abilities and all those kind of things. And then the second half, God really got my attention, and I really kind of themed that chasing God. So the first piece was I went to the University of Arkansas and graduated, didn't have a lot of purpose in college. But when I got my first job, I really found that I loved work. And it really kind of surprised me. It gave me great purpose. I worked for about 5 years for a company in Arkansas that ultimately got bought by McKesson Corporation out of San Francisco. And I decided that my first calling experience was I knew I didn't want to live in Harrison, Arkansas very much longer. I was just young and single. And so I had the opportunity to go to work for McKesson in their corporate headquarters in San Francisco. So I did what was really the biggest 180, I think, to move from a town of 10,000 people in Arkansas to living in just on the bay in San Francisco and working for McKesson. But I was there for 3 years, loved it. And then a software company called, a company whose software I had helped implement in my first job. They called and offered me the opportunity to work for them. And so I moved to Atlanta and was a consultant for them. And they were a publicly traded supply chain management software company. And I just ended up working my way up to a VP of marketing for that company. And then our biggest competitor, who had a great culture reputation, a company called Logistics, they offered me the opportunity to join their executive team and lead marketing for them. And so my wife and I and our first son moved to Washington, D.C., Southern Maryland, basically, and just had a tremendous time working with that company. And this is in the 90s when supply chain management was really just starting to happen. And that's what our software did. And so we grew in some extraordinary ways and just had a great time really leading marketing for that company. But we missed a couple of quarters of earnings expectations, and our stock plummeted. This was in late 98. And this was really the first time that God got my attention. I had just really enjoyed that first 20 years of my career. I just really enjoyed some great blessings, some great success. But I said my priorities were God, family, and work, but I was absolutely not living that. I was living mostly work. And so when we missed a couple of quarters of earnings expectations, I went to dinner with my boss, who I really loved, but I came home unemployed. And so, I mean, it was a shock And it was just such a huge turn for me. And it was clearly God trying to get my attention to really try to use my influence for him. And so after about 3 or 4 months, my wife and I decided that God was calling us to move back to Arkansas. And I was super blessed to go to work for JB Hunt Transport. They're one of the largest transportation companies in the U.S. now. And what was beautiful about that was that my wife and I's faith really started growing during that season. We joined a church in Fayetteville, Arkansas, that was the largest Methodist church in Arkansas. And we just started leading small groups and team classes. And at the same time, this is when this whole idea of faith and work was really birthed in me. I really wanted to understand how to be the same person at work that I was in my personal life. And so I did something unusual. There was a number of leaders at JB Hunt that were believers. And so I decided I was just going to watch them. I didn't tell them. I didn't ask them any questions. I just decided I was going to see how they really live their faith out. And so I'm watching them in restaurants in California, at bars. I'm watching them with good news. I'm watching them with bad news. I'm just watching how they treat people. And I have to tell you, I mean, they weren't perfect, but I was amazed what I learned by a few of these executives at JB Hunt about how they really tried to live out their faith in the workplace. And it really became kind of what I'll call my brand of what faith and work looked like. They weren't praying in meetings. They weren't necessarily sharing the gospel with people constantly. It was really just more of how am I going to honor God with the way I do my work and the way I treat people. All of that was preparation because in 2002, I went to a leadership event at my church. And at the end of the event, the pastor stood on stage and he launched this new ministry called Workmatters. And I was blown away. I was sitting in the audience and it was my whole career and my faith journey had kind of come together in that moment. And so I literally volunteered that day and was blessed to join the original board of directors of this church ministry called Workmatters. And then over the first 8 months of its existence, it really took off much more quickly and more broadly than anyone had expected.
Was that ministry just then focused on your local church, or was it out of the church and focused on broader audience?
Yeah, great question. It was birthed out of the church. And of course, people in the church were kind of tier one users, but it was really for all of Northwest Arkansas. But that really happened just organically. As we started to promote it and have events and different things, people were coming from Walmart and Tyson Foods and JB Hunt. And Northwest Arkansas, by the way, is a very unique place. It's home to Walmart. It's also home to about 1,700 suppliers that sell to Walmart who have full-time offices here, so that they can call directly on Walmart's buyers and on their merchants and so on. But for example, Procter & Gamble has 250 people that live and work in Northwest Arkansas just taking care of Walmart. So there's this huge, the supplier community here is a huge opportunity for faith and work as well. So over those 18 months, Jason, I became just kind of the informal leader of this Workmatters ministry, really because I knew how badly I needed it. And I also just looked around at just my friends and people in my church, and there was just such a dichotomy of faith and work, such a separation. You know, maybe some people gave it lip service like I did, but just the whole idea of integrating your faith and work was in 2002 was pretty new. And so, but after 18 months, our board decided that we had tapped into a movement that was greater than the church. And so they decided to spin it out of the church into a non-denominational nonprofit organization. And when they did that, my wife and I had spent about 6 to 9 months really privately praying that if something like that happened, did God want to call us to lead the nonprofit version of Workmatters? And so we got to a point where we really felt like he did. And so when the church voted 30-0 to spin it out of the church, and I was asked to give the presentation, I left that meeting, the elevator doors closed, and I just went, oh, crap. You know, what have I just
done? What did I do?
2 days later.
And you were, at that time, were you still like full-time at JB Hunt?
Yes.
Working there? Okay.
Yeah. I was a VP of sales and marketing there. And so 2 days later, I resigned from JB Hunt and became really what we call the second founder of Work Matters. The first founder was the pastor, Tom Fraze, in the church. And then I was the one that really stepped out to grow it. And that was 19 years ago. In fact, last Thursday was our 19th anniversary.
Oh, nice.
To be in marketplace ministry over all those years. And it's pretty surreal to see what God has done through this marketplace ministry. We spent about 10 years really focusing on Northwest Arkansas because you literally can influence the world from here because of Walmart, because of these 1,800 suppliers, Tyson Foods, the University of Arkansas is here, JB Hunt. So, but after 10 years, we really decided that we wanted to more intentionally make our content available to people nationally and globally. We started developing more and more of our own content. We started making it digital so that it was available to anyone, anywhere, anytime. And that's kind of brings us to where we are today.
Yeah.
And I have to tell you, and I hope I'm not being prideful in sharing this with you, but a good friend who's actually has a very significant ministry in the faith and work world, whose name is Jordan Rayner. He's written a number of faith and work books, has a tremendous podcast. He just spoke at our leadership event we had a couple of weeks ago. But he sent me a video on our 19th anniversary, and this is what he said, and this meant the world to me. He shared Eugene Peterson's famous quote of "a long obedience in the same direction." And then he said, "You've known your lane, and you've stayed focused and committed to that lane over a long period of time." And that was just one of the most meaningful things anyone had said to me. And it's not me, of course, our whole team is doing all the work, but that just really was a meaningful thing for him to say to us. And it's been a tremendous honor and privilege to get to do this work.
I think he's also authored a book called Master of One, I think is
yes, he has.
one of his works. So I'm reading that right now and I appreciate that. I started to kind of go through that same process of understanding how my work and my faith ties is I did an MBA. It was an adult MBA program at Cornerstone University here in Western Michigan. And they really do a nice job of helping their graduates see that, especially for their adult working program. And it was shortly after that I started to find more resources and eventually came across Work Matters and did a Bible study with some other professionals and I got to know some of the team there. So I've been aware of that ministry for a while. And I think I'm so excited about having you on here today because the whole idea of this podcast is, sharing with other believers how God is working in and through his people in the workplace, that it's not a secular or a sacred work. God calls us to go and work, whether it's at a JB Hunt or a Walmart or, I've spent 30 years in manufacturing and I've met many believers who come into factories every day and honor Christ in the way they work and the way they do their job and the way they treat others. So it's super exciting for me to share that with other people and to talk to you today about that.
I just wanted to congratulate you on your focus on doing this podcast. It still amazes me after all these years, 19 years, how many people still don't necessarily understand this idea of integrating their faith in their work. And the reason is because, there's 99% of the inputs we get regarding our work come from the world. And so all of this messaging that we're getting around leadership and what work really is, and it just drives us in many cases towards unhealthy perspectives about what work really is. And we get caught in that cycle. And then we spend 5 years and then 10 years, 15 years in the workplace. And you're just, that's how you view your work, however you built that foundation. And so just this idea of finding purpose and meaning in your work from the standpoint of your faith is just a game changer for people. And so I just wanted to congratulate you on the work that you're doing here as well.
I appreciate that. It's been a blessing. I prayed a lot about it before I did it. And for me, it's in the Lord's hands. And if he keeps bringing me people to talk to, we'll keep doing it. And if he stops that, then that's all right too. So far, so good.
That's great.
I do want to talk a little bit more about some of the tools and resources of the organization a little later. But before that, David, could we talk a little bit about your family and that situation? And then I also want to dig into your faith in the Lord and how you came to know him.
Yeah, absolutely. Love talking about my family. My wife, Teresa, and I have been married for 31 years, just 15 days ago, I think it was. And we met actually that software company that I told you that I worked at, the first one. Teresa also worked at that company, and she basically did the same thing that I did in the company. And so we got to know each other there and had a little office romance, and we got married. And I got married really late in life. I was 33 when Teresa and I got married. So we've been blessed to have two sons. Our oldest son is 29 years old now, which it's hard to believe. His name is Dylan. He lives in Nashville, Tennessee. He's our musician and is a music producer in Nashville. And he just got married this year to Bethany, who we love. Bethany's launching a new company, by the way, called Crayons to Confidence, which is a company that helps parents with their 0 to 10-year-old kids, just help them raise their children more effectively.
Crayons to Confidence.
Crayons to Confidence. Check out the website.
Okay.
There's some tremendous free resources there. And then our other son is Tyler Roth. He's 23. He played some college basketball and just graduated last May and is now in the workplace. Works for a tremendous company that was founded and led by a guy named Ross Cully, who's a super strong believer and is really cutting edge in terms of what faith and work looks like inside of their company. They have about 250 employees now. So Tyler works for them, and he's a phenomenal young man and just really proud of both of our sons.
Is your wife still in the workplace, or is she involved in Work Matters?
Yeah, she's been in Work Matters from day one. She's worked there. I think we counted 14 years that of the 19 she's worked at Work Matters, but she stopped working with us. Gosh, I think it was about 5 years ago, something like that.
What's your church involvement? What's that look like?
Yeah, if I could, I just want to share my faith story before I get to that.
Please do.
I'm not real proud of my faith journey. My parents were great Christians and raised us in a great Christian home. I've been a Christian as long as I can remember. But as an adult, as I mentioned earlier, I just really didn't live it well. I lived it on Sunday and when I needed God, but it just wasn't I didn't have a relationship with Jesus. And it wasn't something I was pursuing and living every day. And as I said, I really allowed my work to really become my identity. And, God and I talked when I needed God pretty much. But thankfully, I had before Teresa and I got married, I had a roommate, a sales guy from the software company I work for that was a super strong believer. And he just started saying, David, this is not about church. This is about a relationship with Jesus. And just really started, just really gently talking to me about that, which ultimately led to me beside my bed on my knees, giving my heart to Jesus when I was about 32 years old. And then you still heard my story. Even after that, I still had a Sunday Christian kind of lifestyle until literally I lost my job at that company, as I mentioned earlier. And that was just God getting my attention finally. And, the rest of the last 20 years has just been one of really trying to grow my faith on a daily basis and living it out every day and trying to help other people do the same thing. So my wife is really deep in her faith journey, and we're just constantly challenging each other to grow. We go to a non-denominational church here called Fellowship Bible Church. It's a really large church. I don't know how many people we have now, 3 campuses, I guess it is, but probably about 5 or 6, 7,000 people go to this church, but it's a Bible teaching church, and they've been real involved in Work Matters as well.
I think about what you said about you're going to dinner with your boss and coming home unemployed. And I will tell you, I've been pretty career ambitious myself, and I'll honestly say that being fired is probably one of my greatest fears. And I think, I'd like to think I've gotten better about seeing so much of my value wrapped up in my work and job. But I think that when we are really career ambitious, maybe at an unhealthy level, that losing a job like that is such a shocking, dramatic, emotional event. And that's sometimes we got to use those things, obviously, to get a hold of us, just like you talked about he did, and do really an about face and totally upend your life, really, to get through to people.
I think so many of us, Jason, certainly my identity was my business card. It was my title. I was a senior VP of marketing at this high flying software company, and that's an easy place to be, as I mentioned earlier, because the world just kind of trains us to have pride and ego in the work that we're doing. And man, the beauty is if we can when we figure out how to harness that for good instead of just our own self-worth, it's just such a powerful thing. And I'll also mention to you, just before I got fired from my company, I also really struggled with work-life balance. And it was and this company was growing so fast, and I was flying all over the world. And when I wasn't traveling, I had more work than I knew what to do. And I wanted to be at home with my wife and my son at that time. It wasn't that. It was just so much work to do. I could never figure out how to do it in a shorter period of time. And the way I describe it is it's like dripping water. I mean, you just don't see it. It's happening day after day, week after week, year after year. And before you know it, you're just in this work rhythm that is just so out of balance. And so I have a huge heart around helping people with that issue and really saying, man, God, family, work. And you've got to live it out that way, because even though I love work and I always have, it's so temporal, as we know. I mean, it's all over the Bible. And so, but what's not temporable are our relationships, and our relationships with our family, and our relationship with Jesus, and how we're honoring him with the way we're living this life that he's given us. And so, it was a hard lesson to learn, but if I can help anyone else, I hope that it will be worth it. And I'll tell you that when I lost my job, and I think this is relevant for people, I had some prayer time before I got on with you here, and I just for God to kind of lead me in the things that we needed to talk about. But so I feel led just to mention this. Even after I lost my job, the ego continued, and I kind of said, "Hey, I'll show you." And so I was interviewing in Silicon Valley and at Denver, software companies in Atlanta, and I kept getting to like the last two, and they picked the other person, or they wanted to hire me, but I was so arrogant, that I asked for too much, from a compensation standpoint. And until finally my phone just quit ringing. And it was then that I finally was broken and just finally said, God, show me what to do. I've done this the wrong way. My priorities have been in the wrong place. And that's when he guided us to move back to Arkansas. And I shared the rest of that story with you.
I recently made what I would call an unplanned job change. I wasn't let go, but it was probably going to head that way. There was some leadership changes. And so it prompted me to start having to look. And I will tell you that as you shared that, I'll share this, that I took a step back. I had a couple of opportunities, and one was a step back really in a lot of ways. And there was another opportunity that would have been kind of more the same for me, stress wise, time away from home wise, better money. And David, I tell you, I prayed a lot about it. And I asked for the advice of three people that I really trust. One of them, though, it was my wife. Another was a career mentor of mine, and another is more of a peer, I guess, that I've always trusted his insight. And everybody, including how I felt and I prayed about this, everybody pointed to just take a step back into this other role that I had an opportunity to take. And I'll tell you what, I am really, really glad I did that. My spiritual life, I can already feel, has gotten a lot stronger because of the changes in stress and some of the things that weigh over you and some of those bigger roles. And I'm just super glad I did. Just very thankful to the Lord that he provided that. And so it is a little bit of a pride thing. I'll admit that, because like I said, if you look at your career trajectory, it's like, that seems like it was a step back in title or scope or responsibilities, and was, but I'm loving it. I love the work, and what it's allowed me to do outside of work has been good. So
I love that you said you love the work, because I love your whole thought process there. However, some people end up in that job where they kind of took a step back and they just decide that they're really not going to be excellent in the work anymore, because they step back into this job that's beneath them, or whatever the case however you might describe that. The beauty of it is, you have the opportunity to spend more time with your family, to grow in your faith journey, but then you can still be excellent in the work that you're doing. It's just,
and I'll tell you, as I've thought about that, I feel like I can do my work with more excellence now, because it's not only smaller in scope, and that's part of it, but I have a manufacturing background, and I've been an operations leader for a long time. And I've spent a lot of time in broken dysfunctional or distressed as sometimes they're called operations, and this one is not. And so and now I feel like I'm able to do some things with excellence and focus on some things that because you're not in crisis mode all the time. And that's just been a huge blessing. So
that's great.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. So David, I always ask people that I have on here, everybody I interview is a leader in some respect. Most of them have decades of leadership like yourself. And I wonder, what's a core leadership motto or principle that you kind of always go back to and you use not only for yourself, but to coach other leaders that you work with?
That's a great question. I think I would share two. I think your listeners will be able to hear I kind of have two seasons of my life, but my dad grew up on a rice farm. He played football for the Arkansas Razorbacks. He taught us that we could always outwork the other person. He said, you may not be smarter than them, you may not be faster than them, but you can always outwork them. And that really was my motto for a long time. And then I shared with you kind of where that ended up in terms of from a balance standpoint. And so as I've evolved as a leader and as a believer, I think I would say that my motto is really Colossians 3:23. It's whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as working for the Lord, not for men. Amen. So that's a different way to say you can outwork people. I think it's a more biblical approach, obviously.
That saying your dad gave you. My dad always used to tell me that no matter what you do your very best at it. I don't care if you're sweeping the floor, do the best you can at it. Yeah. And it reminds me of grit, what you had talked about, what your dad said. It's just that grit that you're only given so much aptitude. That's what we all have a level of aptitude that we're given, and we're not going to change that. But I think the heart you bring to the work every day is really important, and it's your choice. Your aptitude so much isn't your choice. So, yeah. And I love that verse too. I think about that one all the time. And it's not only at work, right? I mean, that's where the scripture is saying, whatever you do, whatever you do, as you serve at your church, as you serve in your home, as you serve in your workplace. So
very convicting.
Yeah, that's right. What are your spiritual disciplines? What do you do to keep yourself close to the Lord, to be growing in holiness and sanctification? What are the things that you do there?
Yeah. Thanks for asking. Like everyone else, probably, there's always room for more and to kind of improve and to make it a higher priority and all those kinds of things. But I don't know if I'm going to share with you one thing because my sons may end up listening to this, but I'm in the middle. Let me just say this. I'm in the middle of reading the Bible in a year. And so I don't think I'm going to make it in a year, but that's a discipline that I'm really enjoying, of reading some Old Testament, some Psalm, some proverb, and something from the New Testament every day. And so I've loved that. I'm always spend time in prayer, and I have a process it's not unheard of at all, but I try to use my calendar at work for really running my life. And so there's work things that are on there, but I can also put personal things on there that my coworkers don't see. And so I literally put calendar appointments at about 5 or 6 in the morning on my calendar, just the people that I really God's bringing to me to pray for. And I want them right in front of me so that I can be thinking about that. And so I have one for my family and my wife and my 2 sons and our new daughter-in-law, and then just other people that God brings my way. I like to pray for while I'm there. And then I'm a big listener of podcasts. I'm a huge believer that God can really teach us through faith-based podcasts. And I'm still a runner. So I get out at 5 o'clock in the morning and go do some running, and I'll listen and try to grow just while I'm running as well.
Yeah. No, that's good. When you were talking about going through the Bible of the year, of course, there's so many tools now on Bible apps that can help you go through that. And I think, I'm not 100%, but I'm pretty sure Workmatters has one of those on the YouVersion Bible app, I think, right?
Yeah, we have about 14 different devotionals on the YouVersion Bible app that are faith and work focused. Yeah, I highly recommend them. They're really simple, that you can go as deep in it and drive it as deep as you want to, or you can do it in 2 or 3 minutes and move on. But there's some good things there. For people that are YouVersion users, just go to the plans, as they call them, and then just search Workmatters and you'll see them.
Great. Yeah, I want to highlight that because obviously a lot of people listening here are interested in integrating their faith and work. So those tools are there. And then we talked about Jordan earlier, and I just saw he released a devotional book, I think, that he wrote that's meant to start your day in scripture from Genesis to Revelation, but thinking about your work. and how God is going to use you through your work.
Yeah, I think that's going to be a really successful book. I received those emails too. I think it's coming out like in mid-November.
Yeah. So something to watch for. If you think back, David, when you were a young leader, and what were some of the things that you struggled with? I think all of us as a young leader, we struggle. While all of us, if we're honest with ourselves, we probably struggle our whole career as leader. It's always an opportunity to improve when we're leading others. But what was something that you struggled with then? And do you still struggle with it now, or have you overcome it? How did you overcome it? How do you manage it?
Yeah. Obviously, I've already talked about work-life balance and issues that I've had there. And I think in general, I could say that I'm over it, but I would also just one more point on balance. And then I have another thought to share with you on your question, but just one more thought on balance. And it's especially for entrepreneurs. So in essence, I'm an entrepreneur in terms of being the founder of the nonprofit version of Workmatters. And I've learned really through my wife, some more painful lessons on balance regarding my heart. So your time is one thing and your identity is one thing, but your heart is still, I think, another thing. And I think with entrepreneurs, especially, you put so much of yourself into this organization and trying to grow it from nothing to whatever God has for it. And it's almost impossible for it not to get deeply into your heart. And so really just in the last year, I've really been convicted that Work Matters has too much of my heart, and it's got part of my heart that my wife should have and my kids should have. And so that's a new level of work-life balance that I think that's just crucial for us to get right. And I think a lot of us I don't think we're really thinking about our heart in that way.
When you say that, it makes me think about something. I want to give you an example, I guess, and tell me if I'm tracking with you here, but maybe we're home in the evenings and not working all night or on the road all the time, but we're not engaged. We're not there. We're not present with our families as we ought to be, because whatever, our brain is still churning ideas and thoughts and strategies that are work related instead of listening to them, engaging with them, and really connecting with them.
Exactly. You nailed it. And I think it can happen easily. And I don't mean to say it's just entrepreneurs. I think people who really love their work, just like you mentioned, you love yours. I think it's easy especially when you lead a company or founded a company, there's just a lot there, and it's a lot to carry. There's a lot of stress that kind of all rolls up to you. And so it's just really easy. And also just the great parts of it. Like there's so much going on and has gone on at Work Matters over the years that are just awesome to see what God's doing. And so that's in your heart too. And that drives you to want to do more. And so it's just a different version of what I shared with your audience before around work-life balance and time and all that stuff. But I really think there's three elements to work-life balance. I think time is one, identity is one, and heart is the deepest one that's kind of shielded from a lot of people. So that's the first thing that I would mention. The second thing is really just being transparent with you is I fight selfishness. I'm constantly thinking at work about what I need to get done and what my role is. And I'm constantly trying to improve being a servant leader and opening myself up to my team and really thinking of them first I do think of them first, but I still feel like I have a job that I have to do personally. And so I make that the priority. And so it's just something that I'm constantly working on to try to be more selfless and love our team more effectively.
I think I struggle with that too. And by default, I think our hearts we have sinful hearts. We're saved, but we have that sin nature that takes us right back to ourselves. I will tell you that I attended the Work Matters conference that was recently held virtually. I didn't come down a little too far for that.
Yeah, right.
But I was really challenged on that aspect of that servant leadership. And some of the speakers really hit on that. And that was probably the biggest thing that I personally took away from that day of listening was true servant leadership. Like, are you really in tune with the needs of your team and taking down barriers for them and understanding even what they're bringing to work from a personal perspective that is a struggle for them, the things that they want to share with you that you're aware of. And that was huge to be more sensitive to that. So that's been an area of conviction for me.
Yeah. Thanks for your vulnerability there, and also just thanks for the feedback on our conference. That's what you really took away, that God did some things for you there. The speakers were phenomenal. So we've gotten some great feedback. And by the way, you talked about resources from Work Matters, and you've been kind of bringing those up as we go. But all of the Work Matters conference event. So for your listeners, this is an annual national event that we do in Northwest Arkansas, and then we stream it to globally to whoever wants to participate. But you can go to our website and purchase the on-demand conference and get every presentation from that day. It's a great value. The tickets, I think, were $109 or something. So it's $49 for people to be able to grab that content.
Yeah, it is totally worth it. I would encourage anybody. And I'm not just saying that because you're on here, David. It was super beneficial for me. I'm glad I took the day off. I took a vacation day. And of course, it was during the day. So my house was quiet. My son was at school. My wife's a teacher. So, which was good. It was just, I completely was able to focus on that and not be distracted. And it was kind of in that time I wasn't between jobs, but I knew I was getting ready to probably be between them. And so just a time to reset and think about that. So
I love hearing stories like that.
Yeah. And so people can go to the website. They can also get on your mailing list so to make sure they get invited and know about next year's. And then, like I said, you can get the information for the current one. So
yeah, that's right. And I hope that we'll have a little time before we get off to share another tool that's really the primary thing we're focusing on now. So whenever that works out, we can have that conversation.
Great. We will do that. Hey, what do you think, David, as you look around the world in general, what do you see as the biggest gap in leadership that you think was having a negative impact? And I'm talking about people in your sphere of influence, those that are not in your sphere of influence. And where do you think is the biggest missing component?
This is maybe a little bit of a macro example, but I mean, I'm no different than you and thousands of other people in terms of watching what's happened in the last 3 years as everybody has worked through COVID. And then so there's just so many things that are coming together at the same time. And the result of that is just some scary data around people's work. And I don't have that data in front of me, but there's some work that's been done that talks about 3/4 of people in the workplace are not engaged in their work. I mean, they're just going. And that just blows my mind to think about 3/4 of the workers have no purpose and no meaning in their work. And then when you look at the research for Christians, it's alarmingly almost the same. It's about 74% or so. But Christians who have integrated their faith in their work, the data from those people is exactly the opposite. It's like 92% want to change the world. 80 some odd percent want to impact the culture of their companies. About high 70% have purpose and meaning in their work from the standpoint of God and what work looks like from that perspective. And so to answer your question, I really think it's this whole idea of discovering purpose and meaning in your work. And just something that gives people a new vision for their work. And not everyone, it can't always be faith-based, obviously. In most cases, it can't be. But just the idea of helping people discover a purpose and a meaning in the work that they're doing is so missing and lacking in our leadership today. People just don't think in those terms. But that's certainly what we're all about. That's what we've been about for 19 years, is really helping people have a bigger vision for work, a different vision for work than what the world teaches them.
And God gave us work. I mean, I think we've talked about this on a couple of podcasts, and that it's not part of the fall. Work isn't like a curse. God gave us work to do. And as believers, we should stand out, I think, in the workplace for how we do our work and how we treat others. It makes me think about our pastor right now is preaching through a series on basically citizenship and the believer and the culture. And he said something last Sunday about how in Roman times, in the early church, that even though the church was being heavily persecuted, there were church leaders who were trying to communicate with Roman leaders that, hey, Christians are good citizens. Like we pay our taxes and we're trustworthy and we're obedient. Like up until you tell us we have to disobey God, we're told by Scripture and by God's law to walk in obedience to those in authority over us. And that makes me think about how we as employees should stand out and do our work with excellence. And just from the general population, certainly I will say I've worked with many people who were phenomenal employees who weren't believers. But as you look at just maybe the general population of employees, as you said, 75% are disengaged as a group, that, yeah, we should stand out. That certainly should not be the case with believers. God has called us to be where we are. He's put us there, and yeah, we should do all things with excellence for his glory. I think he'll empower us to do that.
Yeah, that really walks into just something else that I wanted to share with you around just kind of honoring Christ with our work. But just this idea, a lot of people now know that, a lot of believers, Christian believers now know that, yeah, I should integrate my faith in my work. But what we hear more than anything else is, how do I really do that? Mm-hmm. I think there's this kind of misnomer, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, that it's like, am I to share the gospel with the person next to me? Am I supposed to have a Bible on my desk? Am I supposed to pray before a meeting? And my answer to that is always maybe. But I don't believe in what we teach at Work Matters is that it really starts with you and your work. And so we created these 7 pillars of faith and work to demystify what it really looks like to integrate your faith and your work. And so I'm going to read these 7 statements. I think people will really be able to relate to it. So like, what does it look like to live your faith at work? So how you treat your coworkers, which is love. How you do your work, which is excellence. Having humble confidence, which is servant leadership. Always doing the right thing, which is integrity. Leading your family well, which is balance. Finding purpose in your work, which is calling. And then lastly, being intentional in reflecting Jesus, which is influence. So that's what we teach, is those 7 things. Are you loving people? Are you doing your work with excellence? Are you a servant leader? Are you doing the right thing from an integrity standpoint? How are you handling this work-life balance and making your family the priority? Are you called into the work that you're doing from the standpoint of it having purpose and meaning? And then lastly, when you do all those things, you're going to have influence. You're going to reflect Jesus. And that last pillar is influence.
Yeah, that's good. I like how that's organized, if you will. I like those systems. It helps you understand the concept. One thing it made me think about, have you ever heard of the book called Love Works by Joel Manby?
Absolutely.
I read his book probably 10 years ago. And again, it was during that time when I was really starting to understand that, yeah, I can integrate my faith with my work. And then about 2 weeks ago, I live in Battle Creek, Michigan, which is where Joel grew up. And about 2 weeks ago, there's a group of kind of loosely affiliated business leaders here in town at a nonprofit that I know, and they put together a lunch and had Joel come and speak. I was so excited. I took half a day off of work and went and listened to him. And yeah, so again, highly recommend.
Oh yeah. We had him speak at a Work Matters event. Gosh, maybe whenever the Love Works first came out, I got introduced to Joel, and his story is amazing. And it was really just a quick side story. We had our 7 pillars that I just walked your listeners through. But the first one that I said is love. It used to be called relationships, because I didn't believe that the workplace was ready for that word, love. And then finally, we looked in the mirror one day and we said, man, people are looking to us to lead them on this faith and work journey. And we're hiding the great commandment to love God and love others. So I said, we're going to change it from relationship to love, and we're going to start banging that drum. And so having Joel come and speak in that book of Love Works, it was what I would hand out to people who were kind of struggling with, what does love really look like in the workplace?
That's right. No, he does a great job in the book of walking through that with scripture. So great resource, really great guy. A little bit of a pivot here. So who are some of your favorite leadership authors? You mentioned podcasts earlier. I mean, who are you listening to? What are some resources that you would recommend to the listeners?
Absolutely. Well, it's funny you asked me that question, because I was literally looking at my bookshelf today and I saw that Love Works book sitting there. So that's probably one of them. But I think I would say, just from a straight leadership perspective, anything John Maxwell has written is phenomenal. Anything Patrick Lencioni writes is phenomenal. And then I'll mention someone that probably many of your listeners don't know the name, but they should. His name is Dr. Steve Graves. Steve actually lives here in Northwest Arkansas. He is an executive coach and a business leader, but he and a friend of his, Tom Addington, were early pioneers in the faith and work movement. In the late 90s, they started writing books. They had an incredible magazine, a national publication magazine called Life at Work for about 5 years. And then he's written a number of books over the years. So really recommend, and they're very readable books, by the way. I'm sitting here looking at them. One is called Flourishing, Why Some People Thrive While Other People Just Survive. About half of his books are faith-based. The other half are just straight leadership-based. But you can go to Stephen, I think it's StephenRGraves.com. I might be off. His name is Steve Graves. People can Google that. Fantastic, highly usable content. And then I think if you ask me to pick one book and one podcast, I got to go back old school on you here. And Sam Walton, the founder of Walmart, wrote a book called Made in America.
Classic, yeah.
Yeah, it's a classic. And it to this day is, I think, the simplicity of what he teaches from a leadership perspective is really powerful. And then podcast, in fact, I just listened this morning, is Craig Groeschel's leadership podcast. By far the best leadership podcast. And it's really, he's a pastor of Life Church. Many of your listeners know that's where YouVersion Bible app was created out of Life Church. Yeah. But he's got, I believe that his leadership podcast may be the most listened to leadership podcast in the world now.
Wow. So I did not know about that one. So I'm going to have to check it out.
Yeah. Craig Groeschel.
All right. I did know your first two authors you mentioned are two of my absolute favorites. John Maxwell. Probably the first leadership book I ever read was 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership. And Patrick Lencioni, as you said, every book I've read, I think I've read all of his books and they're all very readable. I love how he does them in a novel format and story. Yeah, it's good. Good stuff.
Yeah, exactly. If any of your listeners haven't read a Lencioni book, it's a super fun book because as you just said, it's written as a fictional novel. And then the last kind of 25% of the book is what are the leadership lessons that you should take away from that story? Yeah. So it's a lot of fun to read.
I will never forget. I was listening. I had an hour commute at a job I had one time, and I was listening to one of his books, and the whole concept of vulnerability he talked about. And it was like, I can remember being in my car and it just like this light bulb popped in my head. And I'm like, that is so incredible. I'd never had anybody explain that, or I'd never had thought of that. And fortunately, I had a mentor at the time I was meeting with who was also trying to explain that to me. And I think God was using both of those men to kind of speak that into my thick head. But
that's great. Yeah, absolutely.
What advice would you give, David, if you're sitting down with somebody, maybe one of your sons that came and said, hey, Dad, I just got my first promotion leading people. I'm going to lead a team. What advice would you give them for first-time leader?
Oh, I love that question, especially when you make me think about my son. I'm going to give you three things. And in general, I think I failed at all three of them, or maybe a better way to say it is I've learned over time how important they are and have tried to implement them in my life. And the first one I really already shared, and it would just be get your priorities right. Very basic. If you're a Christian, how are you really living your faith out? If you're married and have kids, where's your focus on your family? And then how does work fit in terms of doing your very best there? So get your priorities right would be the first one. I think the second one would be to focus on meaningful relationship. Years ago, I had someone tell me this saying, and it was really for college students. It's not the grades you make, it's the hands you shake. And that's what you should be getting out of your college experience. But I just think that really meaningful relationships with people that you work with stand the test of time. Now, I'll give you a quick story on this. I think in my earlier career, I was very transactional with my relationships. I'm a friendly person. I know a lot of people. I like to talk to people. But at work, it was just very transactional because it's, hey, we're busy, you're busy, I'm busy, let's get this done. And then I was leading the very first Workmatters small group in the workplace in 2002. I was leading it at JB Hunt. And there was a guy in my small group that was a financial analyst, and he was assigned to me. I was VP of sales. And so he would do a ton of spreadsheet work and pricing work for us on deals that we were working on. And he was in this small group, and we got to some prayer requests, and he said, "Hey, I just want to share with everyone that my wife has cancer." And I'll just never forget thinking, "Oh my gosh, I have had so many conversations with this guy, and I don't even know that." And it became my kind of marker around relationships, and just like, you can't, transactional relationships is not the way to do it. They've got to be meaningful. And the third thing I would mention is to always be mentoring. So yeah, I don't care if you're 23 and my younger son's age, who's just been in the workplace for 9 months, but just always, and I didn't do this well early on, but just always be looking for somebody that you can kind of pay it forward, that you can mentor, that you can disciple. I think that's huge. And that's legacy building.
Yeah, that's
focus.
Right. Yeah, good. The transactional piece, I think I can remember the time when that was becoming apparent to me as well, because it was all about just get it done, right? Get the results. I gained a reputation at one time for being someone who would get it done, but would leave a trail of dead bodies in my wake. And
that's right.
It's like, all right, that's not a reputation I'm really trying for. So yeah. Before I ask, I have a last question I always wrap up with, but I would like to go back and talk a little bit more about Work Matters and some of the tools and some of the things that you guys have to offer. I know you wanted to talk a little bit about that too. I just think it's so important because that's really, like I said, that's what this podcast is about, is helping people to honor Christ in their work. So talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me summarize part of it. I mean, people can go to workmatters.org, and there is a ton of content, most of which is free on our site. We have over 100 2-minute YouTube videos of senior executives that we've interviewed on different topics. And so you can literally go to our YouTube channel, which you can get to through our website if you wanted to, but there's just some tremendous teaching there. Our devotionals that we have on the YouVersion Bible app, you can also access from our website. And there's just a number of things on our website that are available to people just in their day-to-day faith and work journey. The biggest thing that we haven't talked about yet is something we call the Work Matters Institute. We've been doing this class for about 10 years, and it is by far the most transformational thing that we do with people around their faith and their work. We now offer that class online. And so all of the details are on our website. But just as an example, we have 2 classes that are running right now. They're 8-week classes. One is for young professionals, which we have a pretty broad definition of about 25 years old to 39 years old. And one is for senior leaders. And so we basically, if you want to think about titles, the senior leaders is more like a company owner, probably a director, VP, senior VP. It's not really C-level, but it's right in that sweet spot. The idea is young professionals really are leading maybe for the first time. And so their mindset is all about leadership and how do I do leadership? Senior leaders start to get past leadership and they start thinking about influence. Like, what's my influence through my leadership? And so both of those are basically going down the same path from a content perspective, but they're tailored for those different audiences. And so I wanted to just let people know about that. It's online. Anyone in the world, anyone across the U.S. can participate in either one of those.
Yeah, I was looking at that right around the conference time. I hadn't been aware of that up until then. And yeah, as you go, you meet online, you meet with the class, right, and go through the material with them. And I think considering it myself, it looked like a really helpful and beneficial for whichever kind of group you fall into to sharpen.
I was going to invite you to participate in it, and we got off the air. So yeah, I'd love to have you.
Yeah, I saw the start time was right about when I was starting this new job. So I thought, well, maybe on the next cycle would be a good time to look at that. So yeah, definitely recommend people look it over, go look at all the resources that are available. Again, not just because I'm talking to you, David, today, but it's just really a really good source for anyone who wants to be serious about honoring the Lord in their work. So as we get ready to wrap up, David, when your time is done at some point in the future, you're going to step down from your role as leading Work Matters and step away from the full-time work. What do you hope your impact will be on people that you've led over the years?
Yeah, wow. I think there's 3 things that surface, and this is primarily from a work standpoint. If we were talking about family and some of those things, it would look different. But just from the standpoint of a workplace leader, faith and work is number one. I just want to be a part of helping as many people as possible have a new vision for what their work can look like, and that they can see that God was a worker and we were created in his image, and therefore the work that he gives all of us, whether we're messing around with spreadsheets or selling something or making something or whatever we may be doing, that it's creation, and that God gave us that role for us to honor him with and for us to really grow the kingdom through that. I think the second thing is tied to that, but it's just this whole idea of having purpose for your work. And it really ties back to faith and work. But I mean, it's just this really having a different vision for what work really is, and having some passion and purpose for what you do. I love what you said earlier, that I think you said your dad passed on to you about doing your best. But just having that mindset that Colossians 3:23, whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as working for the Lord, that's basically doing your best. So I think that'd be my second one. And the last one is, we talked about this one as well, but it's just loving others. It's just really loving people in the workplace in a way that's appropriate and meaningful and impactful, and that relationships get developed and stand the test of time.
Yeah. Yeah. Even after the work is done, I'm very fortunate that the Lord has blessed me with some great professional relationships that have 10 years after we've worked together, still in touch, still can reach out, help each other. And when I mentioned I was considering a couple different options for work, one of the guys I reached out to, he was a mentor of mine a decade ago, and he's been retired for quite a few years. And I sent him an email and he's like, give me a call. And just to be able to have those kind of relationships, people that you trust, and it's pretty awesome. So
that's great, Jason.
Again, I really appreciate you taking the time to jump on here. And I know that it'll be a big benefit for people to learn about Work Matters. And they can also, I suppose, get in touch with you. You're on LinkedIn. There's another way to contact you.
Absolutely. I love to connect with people on LinkedIn.
Yeah. So do that, and then check out the Work Matters website and see all the resources they have to offer. Anything else you'd like to mention before we wrap up?
I don't think so, except I just want to just say bless you for just your obedience to do this podcast and to be a part of the movement of helping people walk with Jesus in every part of their life. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I appreciate that, David. And I want to say the same to you. I really mean it. I mean, Work Matters has had a pretty big impact on me going back 10 years. Catherine Gates, I worked with her on doing a whole study. She was on a podcast, and now she's doing something that's focused on women in the workplace and honoring the Lord. So
yeah, we love Catherine, love her. And she's making a big difference with her life in the marketplace. She truly is.
Yeah. And I like how you put it. It's a movement. And I think it's been a time over the last decade or two that the Lord is hopefully helping his church understand more clearly that he's called them to work. He's put them where they are, and he expects us to glorify him wherever we go into work every day, every night, wherever we're working. So that's good.
Yeah.
Good. All right.
Amen.
All right. Thank you, brother. Again, appreciate your time here, and bless you in your work and everything you guys are doing at Work Matters.
Thank you so much, Jason. It's really been a pleasure.
And thank you for joining us again this month. I pray that God is helping you to see that he has called you to your workplace, and that you can use the 7 pillars David spoke of today as a model to help integrate your faith and work. Hey, please take a moment and rate the podcast to help others find us and to help us get better. And then be sure to join us again next month as we meet another leader who is striving to honor Christ in their work.